The restaurant buzzed with energy that Friday evening. It wasn't just any place, it was one of those high-end establishments where the lights were dimmed just enough to give off an aura of exclusivity. The long oak bar gleamed with polished glasses, and the clink of fine china echoed through the air. The murmurs of conversation were a constant hum as couples and groups settled into their seats, tucking napkins into their laps, preparing for what was promised to be a memorable evening. Dr. Marcus Hunter had spent the day running back-to-back surgeries in the city's busiest hospital. He was tired, but his stomach growled, reminding him of the meal he'd been looking forward to all day. He had read the reviews about this place. 5 stars. Top-notch service. And it was the perfect spot to unwind, even if for just an hour. He had walked in wearing his usual attire, dark slacks, a pressed shirt, and a black jacket, nothing flashy but respectable enough for a fine dining restaurant. His face, worn by years of intense work, wasn't unfamiliar in the hospital corridors, but here, in this world of polished glass and extravagant decor, he felt a bit out of place. He didn't mind, though. His mind was focused on one thing, a peaceful meal. As he approached the entrance, the hostess, a young woman in her 20s, greeted him with a bright smile. It was the kind of smile that usually suggested a warm welcome, one that should have been followed by an eager, right this way. But something about the way she studied him for a moment didn't sit right. Her smile faltered just slightly as she looked at him. He didn't think much of it, assuming it was just the stress of the dinner rush. "I have a reservation," he said, pulling out his phone. The hostess looked down at the screen of her tablet for a few seconds, tapping and swiping in quick succession. Her smile returned, but there was a coldness to it, an edge that Marcus could feel in his gut. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice clipped. "We can't seat you." His mind raced, unsure if he had heard her correctly. He stepped closer to the counter, leaning slightly in. "What do you mean, you can't seat me?" he asked, confusion creasing his brow. The restaurant behind him carried on, unaware of the unfolding tension. "Your reservation is valid, but we cannot accommodate you at this moment. We have no available seats," she explained, her tone flat and impersonal. Marcus took a step back, his confusion turning into a mix of disbelief and anger. He was certain there were tables available. There were people seated, yes, but the restaurant didn't seem at full capacity. The hostess was still staring at her screen, seemingly uninterested in his response. He glanced at the manager standing a few feet away, hoping for some clarification. The manager, a well-groomed man in his mid-30s, caught his eye but then quickly turned his gaze elsewhere, pretending not to notice. "Are you telling me," Marcus said, his voice quieter but intense, "that I'm being turned away?" The hostess didn't answer immediately, but her lips curled in a thin line. "I'm sorry, sir, but we are unable to seat you tonight." For a moment, Marcus stood there, processing what was happening. A wave of anger rose within him, the kind of anger that came from being made to feel invisible. He was a doctor, for God's sake. His hands had saved lives, but in this moment, they felt powerless. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. The restaurant was still alive with conversation, the clinking of silverware, the soft music in the background. No one seemed to notice the quiet storm that had just passed through. No one except for a few curious glances from patrons who watched Marcus' retreating figure with raised eyebrows. He stepped out onto the street, his thoughts swirling. Why? What had just happened? He had been to many places, some more high-end than others, and never had he faced such blatant dismissal. He had seen prejudice before, but this felt different. This felt personal. It was only when he reached the curb that it hit him. The look on the hostess' face. The quick glance from the manager. There was something more to this. Something beyond the simple act of refusing service. It was as if they saw him as less than anyone else in that room. The fact that it happened in a restaurant he'd been dying to try, where people paid hundreds for a meal, added a layer of insult that Marcus couldn't shake. He stood there for a moment, staring at the street, taking deep breaths. His medical training had taught him how to keep calm, how to fight for his patients and for justice. But this? This was different. This was a fight he wasn't sure he could win. He pulled out his phone again, his fingers hovering over the screen. He could call someone, but who? His colleagues would think he was overreacting. It wasn't like he could prove anything. A vague dismissal without any clear explanation. Nothing concrete. But his gut told him something else. There had been something in the hostess' eyes, something in the manager's refusal to help. This wasn't just bad service. This was something deeper, something that had been brewing under the surface. And it wasn't over. The next day, as he sat at his kitchen table, sipping his coffee, Marcus made a decision. He wasn't going to let it go. He wasn't the kind of person who stayed quiet when something felt wrong. But this wasn't about him. This was about the principle of fairness. About making sure that no one else ever felt the sting of rejection in a place that should have been welcoming. After checking the restaurant's website and confirming that the reservation system still showed availability, Marcus called the restaurant. His voice was calm, almost methodical, as he explained the situation to the manager. "I was turned away last night," Marcus said, his tone controlled but firm. "And I want to know why." The manager hesitated. There was a long pause before he spoke again. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, sir. That was an unfortunate mistake on our part." He sounded rehearsed, like he had said the same thing 100 times before. But Marcus wasn't buying it. "That's not good enough," Marcus replied. "I'm coming back tonight. I want a table. And I want to know that there's a legitimate reason for why I was refused service last night." There was another pause, and Marcus could almost hear the manager weighing his options. Finally, he said, "I will make sure a table is available for you, Dr. Hunter. Please come by tonight, and we'll make it right." Marcus hung up the phone and stared at the kitchen counter, his mind racing. He had no intention of letting this go. This wasn't just about dinner. It was about standing up for what was right, for the people who didn't have the voice to fight back. That evening, he arrived early. He was dressed the same as the night before, professional, but nothing out of the ordinary. He stood outside the restaurant for a moment, looking up at the glowing sign that hung above the entrance. He took a deep breath and pushed the door open. This time, the hostess looked up from her screen. Her face changed when she saw him, her smile strained, but she didn't speak right away. The manager appeared from the back and made his way toward Marcus, his face taut, his smile forced. "Dr. Hunter, we are so sorry about last night." "Please, come right in," the manager said quickly, ushering him toward a table. "We've been expecting you." But Marcus wasn't ready to let it go just yet. He looked at the hostess, who was avoiding his gaze, and then back at the manager. "I'm here because I want answers," he said, his voice low, but clear. The manager paused, and for the first time, Marcus saw something like guilt flicker across his face. It was brief, but it was there. The manager didn't seem so sure anymore. The night was still young, but Marcus had already decided this wasn't going to be just another dinner. It was going to be a statement. The dim lights of the restaurant cast long shadows across the polished marble floor as Marcus took his seat at the table. The manager had led him to a spot near the center of the dining area, a place that would have made anyone feel important. But Marcus wasn't fooled. His mind was still reeling from the night before. The unspoken tension was thick in the air. It wasn't the luxurious decor or the crystal-clear wine glasses that bothered him. It was the feeling, the quiet unease that had settled over him as soon as he walked back into the restaurant. Every server, every staff member who passed by seemed to glance at him, but none of them met his eyes. It was as if they all knew something he didn't. Something that went beyond the simple rejection he'd faced the previous night. The manager, a man named Evan, stood at a distance, watching Marcus closely. "I've asked the chef to prepare something special for you tonight," he said, his voice smooth, too smooth. "We want to make sure you're fully satisfied after last night's misunderstanding." Marcus nodded slowly but didn't smile. He wasn't here for a fancy meal or a gesture of goodwill. He was here for answers. And no amount of free food would satisfy his growing suspicion. "You don't need to do that," Marcus said, his voice sharp. "I'm not here for special treatment. I just need to know why you turned me away last night." "What was that about?" Evan shifted uncomfortably on his feet, his eyes flicking toward the hostess and then back to Marcus. "Dr. Hunter," he began, lowering his voice, "it was an unfortunate situation. There was a misunderstanding with the reservation system, and it was entirely my fault. We've fixed the issue, and I assure you, it won't happen again." Marcus leaned forward, studying the manager's face, looking for any sign of truth. There was none. His smile was too practiced, his words too rehearsed. Why did it feel like more than a misunderstanding? Marcus pressed, his voice growing more insistent. Why did I feel like I wasn't wanted here? Evan's eyes darted nervously, and for a brief moment, Marcus saw something flash across the manager's face. Fear? Guilt? He wasn't sure, but it made him uneasy. "I can assure you, sir, that's not the case," Evan replied, his tone stiffening. "We value all our customers, regardless of their background." Marcus didn't respond immediately. He let the silence stretch, watching Evan squirm under the weight of the unspoken question. The manager's hands were trembling ever so slightly, the only sign of his discomfort. A waiter arrived, interrupting their exchange. He placed a glass of water on the table before turning to Marcus with a forced smile. "Your dinner will be served shortly, sir," he said, then turned and quickly walked away. Marcus took a sip of water, his eyes never leaving Evan's. "I'll be watching," he said simply, his voice low but firm. Evan swallowed hard but nodded. "Of course, Dr. Hunter. I understand." The waiter returned with a beautifully presented plate of food, an intricate arrangement of flavors and textures. But Marcus wasn't interested in the food. He wasn't even hungry anymore. His appetite had long since vanished, replaced by an unsettling feeling that only deepened as the minutes ticked by. Every now and then, he would glance around the restaurant, his eyes scanning the other patrons. The couples, the families, the businesspeople, none of them seemed to notice what was happening around them. They were all caught up in their own worlds, in their own little bubbles of luxury. But Marcus could feel it, like a dark cloud hanging over his head. He wasn't just a customer here. He was an outsider, someone they didn't want around. As the meal progressed, the conversation with Evan remained superficial. The manager tried his best to steer the discussion toward the restaurant's menu and the quality of the food, but Marcus wasn't interested. He had no desire to play the part of the polite guest anymore. "I want to speak to the hostess," Marcus said suddenly, his voice cutting through the polite chatter. Evan stiffened. "Dr. Hunter, I don't think that's necessary." "No," Marcus interrupted. "I need to hear it from her." Evan hesitated, looking at the hostess, who was standing by the entrance, nervously tapping her fingers against the countertop. He seemed to be calculating something in his mind before he finally nodded. "All right, Dr. Hunter. I'll have her come over." It didn't take long before the hostess, a young woman named Natalie, was standing at Marcus' table. Her eyes were downcast, her movements rigid. She looked uncomfortable, as if she'd been caught in something she couldn't escape. "Good evening, sir," she said softly, her voice hesitant. Marcus studied her for a moment, trying to read her. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, her face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and something else, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. "I want to know why you refused to serve me last night," Marcus said directly, his tone unwavering. Natalie's eyes flicked toward Evan, who was standing a few feet away, watching the exchange with a nervous expression. She swallowed hard before looking back at Marcus. I don't know what you mean, she stammered, her voice shaking. There was a problem with the system. That's all. Marcus leaned forward, his gaze unrelenting. Don't lie to me. I could tell it wasn't just about a system issue. There was something in your eyes last night. You didn't want me here. And I want to know why. There was a long pause. Marcus could see her struggling with the words, weighing whether or not to say something. And then, without warning, she spoke. I don't have a choice, she whispered, her voice barely audible. They told me to do it. I don't want to lose my job. Marcus frowned, his pulse quickening. Who told you to do it? Her eyes darted nervously around the room before she leaned in slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. The manager. He said we couldn't serve you because of the way you looked. He said people like you wouldn't fit in here. Marcus' stomach tightened. He felt a knot form in his chest as her words sank in. The manager, the person who had been so quick to apologize and offer him free food, was behind this? It didn't make sense. What are you talking about? Marcus asked, trying to steady his voice. Why would he say something like that? Natalie looked down at the floor, tears welling up in her eyes. I don't know. I didn't want to do it. But I had to. I didn't want to lose my job. The weight of her words hung in the air like a thick fog. Gave Marcus a look of surprise before quickly averting his gaze. Dr. Hunter, Evan stammered, his voice thick with nervousness. I didn't expect you to. I'm not here for pleasantries, Marcus interrupted, his tone sharp and commanding. I want to know what's going on here. Why did you tell your staff to reject me last night? Evan's face drained of color, and the man beside him shifted uncomfortably. There was a tense silence before Evan spoke again, his voice almost pleading. Please, Dr. Hunter, let's not do this here. This is a delicate situation. We can talk about this somewhere else. Now is as good a time as any, Marcus replied, his eyes narrowing. I'm done with the games. I want the truth, Evan. Why did you tell Natalie to refuse me service? What's really going on in this restaurant? Evan hesitated, glancing over at the man beside him before lowering his head. I didn't want to do it, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. But I was told I had no choice. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Told by who? Evan swallowed hard, his throat tight. The owners. They made it clear that certain people aren't welcome here. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean by certain people? Evan's eyes flickered to the man beside him, who had been silent until now. The man stepped forward, his hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. It's not just about race, the man said suddenly, his voice low and gravelly. It's about money. Power. Influence. And who they think belongs in their restaurant. Marcus turned to face him fully, sizing him up. The man didn't look like the usual type of person one would expect to see in a high-end restaurant. His clothes were worn, and his expression carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. But his words carried a weight of their own. Who are you? Marcus asked, his voice steady but laced with curiosity. Call me Jack, the man replied with a shrug. I'm a part of the family's business dealings. Let's just say I'm someone they rely on for certain things. Marcus' mind raced. This was more than he had anticipated. There was clearly something bigger going on here, something that involved more than just a simple case of prejudice or a misplaced reservation. What's really going on here? Marcus repeated, his voice growing more insistent. What kind of power do these people have? Evan shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around the room as if he were looking for an escape. You don't understand, Dr. Hunter, he said, his voice shaky. The owners, they have a reputation to protect. They've worked hard to build this place, to create an atmosphere that's exclusive, that attracts the right kind of people. And when someone like you comes in, someone who doesn't fit their idea of what this place should be, they don't know how to handle it. Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had known there was something wrong with the situation, but this? This was more than he had imagined. The restaurant wasn't just rejecting people based on superficial factors, it was a part of a larger system, one built on exclusion and elitism. And what does that mean for people like me? Marcus asked, his voice hardening. What happens when I'm seen as someone who doesn't belong? Evan looked away, his face contorting with guilt. It means you get rejected, he said quietly. It means you don't get to sit at their tables. You don't get to be a part of their world. It's as simple as that. But that's not simple, Marcus shot back. That's a system of oppression. It's exclusion at its worst. Jack nodded slowly, as if he were agreeing with Marcus but reluctant to say too much. It's not just about race. It's about what they want to be seen as. Who they want to have in their circle. You, Dr. Hunter, you don't fit their image. Marcus felt the fire of anger rise in him, but he kept his voice calm. He needed answers, not a confrontation. Who are the owners? Who are these people that think they can decide who belongs and who doesn't? Jack hesitated, glancing at Evan. It was clear that he was deciding whether to say more, weighing the consequences of speaking out. The owners are a wealthy family, Dr. Hunter, Jack said, his tone guarded. They've been in the restaurant business for decades. They've built an empire, and they're fiercely protective of their image. They don't take kindly to anyone who threatens that. So this isn't just about me, Marcus said, piecing it together. It's about power. About control. They want to decide who gets to have a seat at their table, literally and figuratively. Jack nodded again. Exactly. And they'll do whatever it takes to maintain that control. If it means rejecting people like you, so be it. They're not afraid of making enemies. Marcus' heart raced as he processed the information. This was bigger than he could have imagined. The owners of the restaurant were part of a larger, more insidious system that valued power and exclusivity over basic human decency. And it wasn't just affecting him, it was affecting everyone who didn't fit their mold. I won't let this go, Marcus said firmly. I'll make sure everyone knows what's happening here. Evan looked like he wanted to protest, but before he could speak, Jack spoke up. Be careful, he warned, his voice low. These people don't take kindly to being exposed. You're messing with something bigger than you realize. Marcus didn't flinch. He had already made up his mind. He wasn't backing down now. I'll take my chances, he said. As he turned to leave the back room, he could feel the weight of their eyes on him. He knew he was walking into dangerous territory, but he couldn't let the truth be buried. Not this time. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving the dark hall behind him. But Marcus knew this was just the beginning. There was a much bigger story to uncover, and he wasn't going to stop until he had all the answers. Marcus paced back and forth in his apartment, the weight of the conversation with Evan and Jack still lingering in his mind. The more he thought about it, the more unsettling the entire situation became. He had learned some hard truths about power, exclusion, and greed, but they only raised more questions. The restaurant wasn't just a place to eat, it was a battlefield for influence, and those who didn't fit the mold were ruthlessly cast aside. But why? Why had the owners gone to such lengths to reject people like him? And who were they, really? The pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place, but there were still too many gaps. If Marcus was going to get the answers he needed, he had to go deeper, into the heart of the operation itself. He sat down at his desk, opening his laptop. The first thing he did was research the restaurant's owners. The information was scarce, almost too scarce. It was as if the owners had gone out of their way to maintain a low profile, shielding themselves from public scrutiny. The restaurant was well known in the city, but the people behind it were a mystery. Marcus could find only a few names linked to the business, names that led to nothing but dead ends. Then, a thought crossed his mind. What if the answers didn't lie in the present, but in the past? He remembered something Jack had said about the family's history, something about building an empire. It wasn't just about the restaurant. It was about control, power, and the wealth that came with it. Marcus had heard rumors about a secretive group of business magnates who controlled vast parts of the city's economy, a group that seemed untouchable. Could these people be connected? It was a long shot, but it was the only lead he had. He quickly typed in a few keywords into his search engine, secretive business group city elite. He scrolled through the results, his eyes scanning each link, hoping for a clue. Then, something caught his attention, a link to an obscure news article from nearly 20 years ago. The headline read, "Mysterious business leaders behind city's rapid growth, who are they?" Marcus clicked on the article, his heart racing. The article was old, but the details were shocking. It talked about a small group of businessmen who had risen to power in the city almost overnight, acquiring multiple restaurants, hotels, and real estate properties. The article didn't name names, but it hinted at a shadowy, almost cult-like organization that was behind the rapid expansion of the city's wealthiest neighborhoods. As Marcus read on, the article mentioned one name over and over again, Caldwell. The Caldwell family had been involved in almost every major business transaction in the city. They were the silent power brokers, working behind the scenes to shape the future of the city. The article also made cryptic references to a founding father of the group, a man whose identity had never been fully revealed. It was clear that the Caldwell family wasn't just about business, they were about control. Marcus sat back, the realization hitting him like a ton of bricks. The owners of the restaurant weren't just wealthy businesspeople. They were part of something much bigger, a hidden network of powerful elites who were shaping the future of the city. The restaurant was just one piece of their vast empire. But there was more. As Marcus scrolled through the article, he found a photograph buried near the bottom. It was a group shot of several men in suits, standing together outside a luxury hotel. The caption read, "The founding members of the Caldwell Group, date unknown." Marcus's eyes narrowed as he studied the photo. There, in the back row, was a man he recognized. It was Evan, the manager of the restaurant. His face, though younger, was unmistakable. Evan had been a part of this group all along. But what did that mean for Marcus? He knew he had to confront Evan again. There was no more dancing around the truth. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to stop until he got them. Later that evening, Marcus returned to the restaurant. This time, he didn't bother with the front door. He went straight through the back entrance, bypassing the crowded dining area. The staff gave him curious glances, but no one stopped him. They knew who he was now, the man who had been rejected, and who was now poking around their inner workings. He found Evan in the same spot he had spoken to him earlier, standing near the kitchen. The manager looked up, his eyes widening as Marcus approached. "Dr. Hunter," Evan greeted him nervously. "I thought you might come back." "I've seen enough," Marcus said flatly, walking up to the counter. "I know about the Caldwell Group. I know what you're involved in. And I know you're hiding something from me." Evan's face paled, and he took a step back, his hand reaching for the edge of the counter. "Please, Marcus. Don't try to deny it," Marcus cut him off. "I know about the group, the family, everything. And I saw you in that photograph. You're not just a manager here, are you? You're part of the Caldwell legacy. Tell me the truth, Evan. Why was I rejected? What's really going on behind the scenes?" Evan swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the kitchen as if looking for an escape. I didn't want this. I didn't want to be a part of it, but I didn't have a choice. Marcus felt his anger rise. What do you mean you didn't have a choice? The Caldwell family controls everything, Evan said, his voice barely above a whisper. They make the decisions. They decide who's in and who's out. They don't like people like you, people who challenge their power. They have a reputation to protect. And anyone who threatens that is dealt with. Marcus clenched his fists. And what happens to people who are dealt with? Evan looked away, unable to meet Marcus's gaze. They disappear. Not literally, but they're erased from the picture. Discredited. Rejected. Pushed out. It's a game of survival. If you're not part of their world, you don't exist. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. This is insane. You're telling me that a group of people can just control everything like this? They get to decide who belongs and who doesn't? Evan nodded grimly. They have the power, Marcus. They've had it for years. And once you're in their crosshairs, there's no getting out. Marcus stared at him, his mind racing. The deeper he dug, the darker the truth became. The Caldwell family wasn't just running a restaurant, they were running an empire of control, manipulating the city's elites, keeping everything under their thumb. But why? What was the endgame? And what did Marcus have to do with it all? I won't stop, Marcus said finally, his voice steady. I'll find out everything. I'll expose you, and I'll expose them. Evan's face twisted with fear. You don't understand. You have no idea what they're capable of. If you go after them, you're putting yourself in danger. I'm not afraid of them, Marcus replied, his eyes narrowing. I'm not afraid of anyone. I'm going to find the truth. And nothing you or they can do will stop me. With that, Marcus turned and walked away, leaving Evan standing in the shadows, his heart racing with fear. The following week, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger than him was unfolding. The deeper he dug, the more secrets he uncovered, secrets that some people would kill to protect. But none of that stopped him. He had come too far to back down now. His research into the Caldwell family had led him to several leads, but there was something that kept pulling him back to the restaurant, something gnawing at him that didn't quite add up. The pieces of the puzzle were there, but they didn't fit together neatly, like a jigsaw with missing pieces that didn't seem to belong. He couldn't stop thinking about the power dynamic that had been revealed to him. The Caldwell family, masked by their empire of restaurants, hotels, and business dealings, was more than just wealthy. They were a hidden dynasty, pulling the strings behind the scenes in ways that went unnoticed by most. But to whom was Marcus really talking? Who exactly had he been talking to for all this time? Evan? Jack? The others working in the restaurant? It was clear that every person in the chain of command had their role to play in keeping the family's secrets hidden. The tension surrounding him was palpable, but it was Jack's words that stuck with him the most. If you're going to expose them, you have to be careful. They control everything, even the city's police force. You don't know who's working for them. He couldn't shake the idea that people Marcus had trusted weren't really trustworthy at all. They might have been pawns just like him, trapped in the same web of manipulation, powerless to do anything except stay silent. That was until Marcus realized it was all a game to them, a game of survival, and he'd been made the pawn. The next day, Marcus sat down in his apartment, looking over the files he had gathered over the past week. There were more holes than answers, and he knew that if he didn't act soon, the truth might slip through his fingers. He had to confront the powerful figures behind the restaurant, no more talking to employees or digging around in articles. He needed face-to-face confrontation. But who would he go after first? As he mulled over his options, his phone rang. The caller ID flashed Evan's name, and for a brief moment, Marcus hesitated. Could he trust him? Was Evan playing him? But then, the sheer frustration of the unknown pushed him to pick up. "Hello? Marcus, it's Evan. You need to stop." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, stop? I'm getting closer to the truth. It's only a matter of time before the whole city knows what they've been hiding." "No," Evan interjected, his voice frantic. "You don't understand. You're in danger. The Caldwells don't take kindly to people digging into their affairs. If you keep going, they'll destroy everything, your career, your life, they'll make you disappear. Please, I'm begging you. Just leave it alone." Marcus stood up from his desk, pacing around his room, the intensity of the conversation weighing on him. "You're scared. But you're not telling me something, Evan. What are they really capable of? What happens if I don't stop?" Evan's silence was deafening. Then, after a long pause, he finally spoke again. "You have to trust me. I've seen what happens to people who don't listen to them. It's not just the money. It's not just the power. They control the people who could help you. They've got everyone in their pocket, officials, business leaders, police. There's no way to fight them, Marcus. You're too small to win." "Then help me," Marcus demanded, his frustration boiling over. "You're part of this. You know how they operate. Help me expose them." "I can't," Evan's voice cracked, desperation creeping into his words. "I'll be next. They'll come for me, too. You don't understand. They have eyes everywhere. Even when you think you're safe, they're watching." With that, the call abruptly ended, and Marcus was left staring at his phone, his thoughts swirling in confusion. Evan had been clear, the situation was worse than he'd imagined. But Marcus refused to back down. Evan's fear only solidified Marcus's resolve. The deeper they went, the more ruthless they became. The more secrets they had to hide, the greater the risk for anyone who tried to expose them. A dangerous encounter. 2 days later, Marcus finally found his opening. He had discovered a potential ally in an unlikely place, the city's underground investigative journalist community. There was a journalist, a woman named Tessa Caldwell, no relation to the Caldwell family, but coincidentally, the same surname, that had made a name for herself exposing corporate corruption and government conspiracies. Her reputation as a fearless truth-seeker had earned her the respect of some powerful people in the city, even if her articles were often buried in obscure publications. Marcus made contact with her through an encrypted message, outlining his findings about the restaurant and the Caldwells. Her response was immediate: "Meet me at the usual place. We need to talk." The place was a small, hidden cafe on the outskirts of town. Marcus arrived an hour before their scheduled meeting time to ensure no one was following him. He was nervous, unsure of who he could trust at this point, but he knew he needed to talk to Tessa. She was his best chance at finding a way to take down the Caldwell empire. When he entered the cafe, Tessa was already there, sitting at a corner table. She had a no-nonsense demeanor, her piercing blue eyes scanning the room as if she were always on the lookout for danger. As soon as she saw Marcus, she waved him over. "Marcus Hunter, the doctor-turned-investigator," she said, smirking as he sat down. "I've heard a lot about you." "I'm sure it's not all good," Marcus replied, his voice tight with unease. "But I've found something huge. The Caldwells are running a much bigger operation than anyone realizes. They're not just business moguls, they control everything, from restaurants to law enforcement. And I have the proof." Tessa raised an eyebrow. "Proof, huh? I've been looking for someone to take on the Caldwells for years, but everyone who tries gets crushed. What makes you think you're any different?" Marcus leaned forward, his voice lowering to a whisper. "Because I'm not going to back down. I know how they work. They think they're untouchable. But I'm going to prove them wrong." Tessa studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a nod, she said, "All right, I'll help you. But you need to understand one thing. The Caldwells aren't just powerful. They're dangerous. If you're serious about this, you're risking your life." Marcus's eyes locked with hers, determination in his gaze. "I'm willing to risk it all. Let's take them down." The shocking revelation. Later that night, Marcus and Tessa met again at a safe house she had set up in the heart of the city. It was a nondescript apartment, far removed from the glittering world of the Caldwells. Inside, the walls were covered with maps, photographs, and notes, pieces of a puzzle that Tessa had been working on for years. "I've been tracking the Caldwells for a long time," Tessa said, as she pinned a photo of the Caldwell family to the wall. "They have their hands in everything. And I mean everything. Hotels, restaurants, politics, real estate, you name it. But what most people don't know is that they've been laundering money for years, covering up their dirty dealings by masking them with their legitimate businesses." Marcus's eyes widened. "Money laundering? You're telling me they've been doing this under everyone's nose?" Tessa nodded grimly. "Yes. And it's not just money. There are other, darker things involved. People go missing when they get in their way. They've been doing this for decades, but they've always stayed a step ahead of the law. I've been trying to get the proof, but they're too good at covering their tracks." Marcus clenched his fists. "That's why they rejected me. It's all connected. They don't want anyone like me getting too close to the truth." Tessa's gaze softened. "It's worse than that. They don't just want you gone. They want to make an example of you. You're asking for trouble, Marcus. But if we can expose them, if we can get the right evidence into the public's hands, we could bring them down." Marcus nodded, the weight of the task ahead settling on him. But he had no choice now. There was no turning back. Marcus sat in the dimly lit room, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. He glanced at the clock, 10:48 p.m. The city outside was quiet, a stark contrast to the turmoil in his mind. His heart raced as the weight of everything he had learned over the past few days settled upon him. The pieces of the puzzle were finally beginning to fall into place, but with each revelation, the danger grew. Tessa's warning echoed in his mind, "They're watching you. Every move, every word. You can't trust anyone." He had heard the phrase, "the walls are closing in," before, but now it felt more real than ever. He was no longer just a bystander, a curious investigator poking around. He was a target. The Caldwells knew who he was, and they had likely been aware of his every move for weeks. The phone call with Evan had made that much clear. But it was too late to back out now. He had come too far. Too many lives were at stake. His phone buzzed on the table, breaking his concentration. He grabbed it immediately, his pulse quickening. It was a text message from Tessa. "Tessa. We have the evidence. It's all in the files I sent you. Tomorrow, we go public. Are you ready?" He read the message 3 times, his fingers trembling as he typed his reply. "Marcus. I'm ready. Let's finish this." The message was simple, but it carried the weight of a promise to expose the truth, no matter the cost. He could already feel the fear crawling at the edges of his mind, but he pushed it aside. If he backed down now, if he let the Caldwells win. The journalist hesitated, but then, in a low voice, said, "I'll meet you. Send me the files. But you'd better be prepared. If this story goes live, it won't just be the Caldwells after you. Everyone who's involved will want you silenced." Marcus's heart pounded as he sent the files over. He had crossed the point of no return. But now, more than ever, he was committed to exposing the truth. The betrayal. Hours later, Marcus and Tessa sat in a small, dimly lit room at a safe house provided by Tessa. They waited, listening for any sound that might indicate their meeting with the journalist was imminent. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, and every creak of the floorboards or flicker of the light sent a wave of tension through Marcus. Tessa was sitting across from him, flipping through the folder once again, checking everything one last time. "They're going to come for us," Tessa said, her eyes scanning the documents. "I've been doing this for years, and I've never seen a case this big. The Caldwells won't let this slide." Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had been afraid for so long, but now, in this moment, he felt a different kind of clarity. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about justice. Suddenly, the door creaked open. Marcus and Tessa froze, their eyes darting to the figure standing in the doorway. It wasn't the journalist. It was Evan. "Marcus, you have to listen to me," Evan said, his voice panicked. "You're making a mistake. They're going to kill you. The journalist you've been talking to, they're on the Caldwell payroll. This whole thing, it's a setup." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "What are you talking about?" "I didn't want to get you involved," Evan continued, his voice shaky. "But I couldn't sit back anymore. I've been working with them. I thought I could get out, but they've got me. They've been watching you this whole time. The journalist, the files, they're all part of their plan. They've known everything from the start." Tessa jumped to her feet. "You're lying. We have the evidence. We've checked every lead. This isn't some trap." "No, Tessa, it's true," Evan said, his face pale. "I didn't have a choice. I thought I could warn you before it was too late. But it's already started. They're coming for you." Marcus stood up, his mind racing. He had trusted Evan. He had believed in him. But now, with everything on the line, he realized the full weight of betrayal. The walls were closing in faster than he could have imagined. But he couldn't let it end like this. He couldn't let the Caldwells win. "Get out," Marcus said, his voice cold. "We're doing this our way. We're going to expose them, and nothing you say can stop us." Evan's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. If you expose them, they'll kill you, Marcus. They'll make it look like an accident. You're playing into their hands." Marcus took a deep breath, his chest tight. "Then let them come. The revelation and the escape." With Evan's warning still ringing in his ears, Marcus and Tessa made their way to the meeting point with the journalist. Every step felt heavier than the last, but they couldn't afford to back down now. The world around them was closing in, and Marcus could feel the weight of the decision he had made pressing against his chest. He had already lost too much. His life was no longer just his own. It was a weapon. A weapon that could bring down the people who had ruined countless lives, including his own. When they reached the meeting point, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that everything was wrong. The place was too quiet. Too empty. Suddenly, the doors slammed shut behind them. The trap had been set.